looks like we have a quorum. It's 7:15 p.m. for our start time. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you.
This is the Town of Richmond Planning Commission meeting for November 20th, 2024. And we have myself, Allison, Ian, and Chris as a quorum of the Planning Commission. Eric as a guest. Hi, Eric, and MMCTV, and Keith, our Director of Planning and Zoning. So, welcome everybody. A quick look at the agenda. We have two items. One is to review the flood hazard overlay district amendments that we've been working on, and the second one is to review the density bonus program, what we've got so far, and to talk about that a little bit, and to talk about Jelena Court a little bit. So I am assuming that no one is here who would like to talk about anything else. Raise your hand if you want to talk about something not on the agenda.
I have a question from the minutes of the last meeting, which I was not able to attend.
Okay, do you want to do that when we do the minutes?
Sure.
Okay. So nobody seems to have a question on non-agenda items. Ian, do you have a question on non-agenda items?
I do. I was just curious if you or anybody got together with Jana since we last met.
That was my question too.
Oh, okay. Yep. Well, the update on that is that after I reached out to her with that letter that you all got, she called me to find out what the question was going to be. Mm-hmm. You know, she wanted a little more information before she met with people so that she knew something about it. So I filled her in that it was about Act 181 and its relationship to Act 47, and, you know, told her that the things that we had talked about, and she has agreed to find out more about it. She's going to talk to the Legislative Council of the legislature, and also reach out to ACCD and the League of Cities and Towns to see if she can gain a little more information about it. And then she's going to either come to a planning commission meeting, or we'll get together with whoever wants to talk to her. So Great. Some progress is being made. She's had a busy time and her son has been sick and this and that. So I just talked to her today, and she's getting brought up to speed, trying to find out the intent of the legislation and so forth. So, yep.
Should someone let Christy Witters know that, or is it upon her to follow up?
Sure. Yeah, I can just send her a quick email telling her that Jana's onto it, and she's going to come and talk to us when she feels like she knows something about it.
All right, thanks.
Yep. Okay. All right, so no other comments. So we can review the 11/6/24 minutes, and this was your question about that, Chris, right?
Correct.
Okay. So that's the update on that. Okay. Any other questions or additions to the minutes, concerns? Not seeing any hands or hearing any comments, we will accept those minutes into the record as written. Thank you. Okay, so we'll move on to item number 5. Review the flood hazard overlay district draft number 3. So we can look at, this is following the changes or following the input that we had from the 3 Parks Committee at the last meeting. I don't see anyone here from that committee tonight. Fran did send me one thing which I can share with you in a minute. The 2 changes that came out of that meeting, they were pleased with the changes that had been made. They were concerned about signs, if there was some kind of allowance for signs, and also portable toilets if they moved the restroom building up onto the plateau. They wanted to be able to place a portable toilet down by the baseball fields for the kids down there. So we added to incidental structures. We went over that last time, how that's for little things like poles and picnic tables, trash cans, so that they don't need to be permitted every time you want to put a new trash can down there. So we added signs and portable toilets. With the signs, they will also have to align with the sign section. So this is in the AR district. So there are certain regulations about the size of signs and so forth, and, you know, directional signs versus whatever kinds of signs. So it notates that under incidental structures where we add signs, we also say, see also section 5.7.1, which regulates the signs in that district.
Do you want me to pull that up?
Does anybody want to see that?
Pretty exciting verbiage.
You know, it allows for small signs, basically, and informational signs, directional signs. The Three Parks Committee didn't have anything big in mind. They just wanted to be able to, you know, I don't know, direct you to things or put up a sign for the farmer's market or something like that.
Yep.
So, I don't know, do you see anything, Keith, in there that you would find problematic?
No, not at all. I mean, especially wayfinding signage is exempt. You know, you can have wayfinding. You can have directional signing. That's fine. Obviously, if you have advertising or any type of permanent sign, you need to go through 5.7, which is pretty much stated in the FHOD update. So no, I think we're in good
Yeah.
shape.
You know, you can't have neon signs. There are a bunch of regulations about signs. They can't be flashing or whatever.
Mhm.
So we're hoping that that takes care of those two concerns.
But it could be commercial signage is what you're saying?
Not
I don't think so. Maybe
yeah, I
we
don't
should
think so.
pull it up and look at it.
well, I mean, you're just allowing for signage in that zone, in that overlay. It's still governed by the sign ordinance. But yeah, I can pull it up. Not a big deal.
So
Sign
this is-
ordinance is mostly about size, right?
But it's about size, no internally lit.
Mhm.
There's also shapes that you have to deal with. But you couldn't put a commercial sign in there, with the exception of maybe a temporary one, Chris, for the farmer's market. But somebody wanted to come in and, you know, put up, you know, Stuckies or something in there. I do not believe that would be allowed. It is town land. It would be a town application.
And so it's
see.
5.7.1, the sign ordinance.
So into the incidental structures, we've added the green area here. Portable toilets.
Yeah. So, and then if you want to see what is referenced in the sign ordinance and you look at 5.7.1, there are some signs that don't require a permit.
Right. And those are the wayfinding signs that I was talking about. And
Yep.
Right.
And so there's a whole list of sign that can identify a private residence. We don't need that. It's going to be a sign limited to direction, instruction, or convenience of the public, a non-illuminated sign, which shall be limited to advertising agricultural products grown on the premises. That won't be applicable. Non-illuminated signs to be maintained for not more than 2 weeks that identify fairs, auctions, expositions, campaign drives, etc. Signs for the direction of the public on privately owned or nonprofit recreation land. So that would be applicable. These signs will not exceed 2 square feet per face.
And there's sign limit, I mean, there's size limitations on commercial signs also, and no internally lit signs, and, you know, it's actually kind of a flawed, flawed language. It's difficult to administer sometimes, but that's really not what we're here for. We're here for the FHOD, so.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I don't want to spend too much time on it. I was just mostly curious about that.
Yeah, well, the whole of section 5.7 goes through these different kinds of signs, which ones need permits, which ones, you know,
Lots of fun.
are in the AR. Mostly they don't relate at all to the park because they're about businesses, personal residences, you know, stuff like that. So, but I didn't see anything in there when I read through that would be problematic for the park. It's just that it needs to apply also. Okay, so those were really the only two things that were suggested. Chris, I don't know if you looked at the stuff that we added prior to last meeting, which allowed for accessibility and also for a safety fence around the playground. Those were the two main things that we hadn't allowed for before. We did add some definitions in there. They were fine with those. These are to give Tyler something to hang the structures on that he's going to allow, like the playground structures. And then the open air recreational structure, which is going to allow you, if you choose, to rebuild the band shell as some other kind of open air recreational structure, such as a pavilion. So
It allows that, but does not require that.
no, it does not require it.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, we're giving Tyler a definition, open air recreational structure, into which he can put band shell. And we know that it can be relocated, reconstructed, rebuilt, however you want it, not just as a band shell, but it could be a band shell. You could have the same band shell we've got now. You could rebuild it as the same band shell. You could rebuild it as a different open air recreational structure, like a pavilion, which actually would allow water to move through it, maybe better. So that gives you the option to, you know, what we suggested to the 3 park committee is they find out what people want. Do they want this same band shell? Do they want it just fixed? Do they want a new band shell just like this one? Do they want a pavilion? Any of those things that can now be placed in this open air recreation structure category.
So that makes sense. Was there any thought about, do we want to say anything about the nature of the fence around the equipment, or?
So the nature of the fence, if you look in, so this will be decided by the DRB.
Right.
And it's in the non-conforming structures section. And if you look at section 6.8.15, that's the whole non-conforming uses upon which we're basing the idea that you can move these things around because they're already existing. So in 6.8.15, under E, we talk about the DRB, what they can allow, which is moving it, rebuilding it, reconstructing it, and also under section V, which is about accessibility, and VI, which is about the safety fence. So since you asked about the safety fence, what it says is a safety fence around a non-conforming structure or use may be needed to protect children from contiguous dangers. The fencing shall provide the least possible resistance to floodwaters and debris while still achieving the protective function. And this was actually suggested by Kyle Medash, is that you wouldn't necessarily want to put a chain link fence, for instance. You would want to put something that is going to admit the maximum amount of water and debris, but it still has to be protective of children. And like we talked about before, the little children should not be able to stick their head between the bars and get it stuck, because that's what all children want to do.
That's pretty funny.
So we're hoping that those words will require that this fence be designed by someone who knows something about fences and children and floods, because it shall provide the least possible resistance to floodwaters and debris while still achieving its protective function. It may be a removable fence. It may be horizontal bars. But
That looks good.
it'll have to be designed.
Yep.
Okay, and then the other piece that we added in for last time was the statement right above that, because there's this accessibility question. What can we do to make these structures more accessible to anybody either with a physical handicap or other handicap? And so the language as it states right now is a reasonable degree of accessibility to a non-conforming structure or use may be provided. And it goes on to say that in this context, reasonable means accepting the current terrain as given and accepting that assistance to some disabled visitors might be required. And I quoted from some of the ADA language that allows for a reasonable degree of not being able to meet the ADA standards, because they understand that in many situations you really can't meet them, such as the fact that the bridge over the river, the Red Bridge, is not actually accessible because the grade is too steep.
Oh, yeah.
So something I will say about that is that the Three Parks Committee gave these proposed regulations to John Lynn of Hillview Collaborative, but he's not doing it as part of Hillview Collaborative, just as a citizen architect, to look at, to see what he thought about them. And he felt there were 2 points that he made. He sent a letter, which I just got about like half an hour ago, saying that it would be nice to be able to alter the grade by moving fill from one place in the FHOD, in the flood hazard overlay district, in the floodway, from moving it from one place to another place, just like you can move structures. Now, in the template, in the state of Vermont's flood hazard overlay template that our regulation is based upon, new fill being added is prohibited in the floodway. So, there's a bunch of questions here. One is, if you move it from one place in the floodway to another place in the floodway, is that new fill? It's just the same, it's all dirt from the floodway. It's old dirt. It does seem like it might open up some unintended avenues for moving dirt around, but we could think about that. Could you make the grade up onto the grassy knoll, or the plateau we're now calling it, could you make the grade more gradual by moving dirt around from one place to another? Would that be okay? Does that increase the flood hazard? We're trying to not increase the flood hazard here. So that was one point. Could you move dirt around? The other point that he made was, it doesn't sound like we're allowing for a paved path
That's correct.
because of the way we've defined recreation path. But for it to be any kind of accessible, as I understand it, to a wheelchair, for instance, is going to have to be paved. So, and having it, the language that says a reasonable degree of accessibility was kind of meant to allow for that, for a paved path. FEMA doesn't care so much about flat on the ground things like pavement. So do we want to say something in this reasonable degree of accessibility that specifically states including a paved path? So those were the 2 points that he brought up. Nobody seems to be here to defend them from the 3 Parks Committee, but, you know, he's kind of a reasonable guy, I guess, and they're relevant to making a design because he's been asked to make a design of the structures that would be placed up on the plateau.
I would add that the 3 Parks Committee is not anticipating putting in a path to begin with, so a paved path, I should say. So,
Well, no, they're not anticipating putting a paved path around the park, which is not an accessibility path. You know, I mean, they're differentiating between a path that goes from the parking lot to the playground or to the restroom, differentiating that from a paved path circling the park that is just for
right.
hiking or whatever.
Yeah, that was my take on his email, though, is that it was the two issues, the accessibility issue to the knoll
Yeah.
and a paved recreational path, you know, around wherever, you know, they wanted to put it. But I mean, I could have interpreted that wrong also, so.
Yeah, I mean, I just interpreted it to mean that he wanted an accessibility path to be able to be paved.
Okay.
So, I mean, the Parks
How'd you
Committee
say
has
that?
said that they aren't going to put a path all around the whole thing, the whole park
Yeah.
is paved, but I think they're probably interested in the accessibility path being able to be paved. Ian,
So it's not, is it difficult to just word it in such a way that prohibits a recreational path? And if they're gonna use asphalt, it can only be used for accessibility, like to be ADA compliant or something like that?
probably not. I mean, I guess where I would put it is in this section V that we've added to 5.8.15E, which is a reasonable degree of accessibility, including a paved path. I would describe it only in terms of accessibility to the structures. And, you know, once again, I would hope that because it says you want to use the minimum amount of on-ground improvements that you can, they would have it designed by someone. I mean, you know, should it come off the sidewalk along the road, for instance, or should it come up the lowest grade, which is really near the river? Is that where you would put it? Or, you know, I mean, somebody should think about what serves the purpose with the least possible amount of paving.
Right.
But I think we could probably write it that way, Ian.
Yeah, I think that, you know, what may raise a red flag to somebody is that if you're too ambiguous and you leave the door open for a more involved project where someone wants to build a paved path around the park. So.
Right.
That's not associated with accessibility. Yeah.
Right.
Right. I mean, I think it needs to be accessible to a structure.
Yeah.
Or to a building, or, you know, the playground is the playground structure, something like that. We could write that in there if people are okay with that.
What is this? This is, bear with me here, 815 CV?
It's section
E.
E, which is in the floodway I think D is talking about the DRB's role in the outside the floodway.
Oh, it's not lettered. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's the next one after this. Keep going down. That one right there, where there's a, yeah, there you go.
Ah, fantastic.
Somehow the E got left off. That's E.
Eek.
Yep.
So let's work that language real quick. Let's see. The concept is additional benefits may be new to trees. This contest mean accepting turn train is given, accepting that assistance. For accessibility purposes, paving may be considered. Something along those lines. Or like for accessibility purposes only.
Right.
Yep.
Okay, so let's see, where would that fit in?
So I think Virginia's point about accessibility to what, because I think the concern here is if accessibility gets broadly interpreted to things like a walking path around the.
Yeah, you could. Yeah.
Right.
To existing structures. But you can't add new structures.
Yeah, that would work.
So for accessibility to existing structures, a paved surface may be considered.
Yeah, I mean that the
We'll work
structures
that.
might be relocated,
Yeah,
but
Well, we are anticipating that.
right, we're anticipating that. I was thinking we could maybe say a reasonable degree of accessibility, including a paved path to a non-conforming structure or use may be provided. Would that work? It's a little shorter with the ink
Yeah,
budget.
absolutely. You know, I'm all about brevity.
It does say to a non-conforming structure or use may be provided. I mean, you know, somebody may say they want a paved path to the soccer field to see the soccer game, and I don't know how I feel about that. I mean,
no.
people have managed all these years to see the soccer games, I guess, just by going on the park road there.
It's pretty flat there too. So,
And it's
but,
pretty flat.
yeah, I don't want to get caught in the minutia here.
I mean, I'm certainly not arguing for this, but I've pushed a wheelchair across that field there. It's not fun.
Well, we could let the DRB decide. I mean,
Well,
Yeah,
that's
I
passing the
think
buck.
we could beat this to death a little bit here. I think maybe the DRB is the right place, particularly if it's not an imminent concern. I mean, if we don't know if anybody's planning to do this.
yeah. They would like to put one up onto the plateau, which is where these structures may be relocated to. And, you know, I guess I don't feel as strongly about it because the ANR and the flood people don't seem to care as much about things flat on the ground, which is why here in Richmond, we allow parking and driveways in the floodway. We allow them. So even though it seems that they would reduce the permeability of the ground, they do not obstruct the flow of the water in any way or increase the velocity of the water or have any outside impacts if they're flat on the ground, I think is their rationale for looking at it.
Mm-hmm.
So Ian, you had another comment.
This may not be like in the purview of the planning commission, but personally, I would like the language to make it impossible for someone to try to expand upon this and put a paved path in that park, except exactly where you're thinking it's going to be.
I agree.
I think the V covers that because we're bringing in they were introducing that non-conforming structure. Well, we do have the use in there, Virginia. So,
I mean, if you're comfortable that this language serves that purpose, I trust your judgment.
Hmm.
you can work it. It just seems like it would be just a couple words, though. So you think it's easy. It's just freaking not.
Right.
For some reason, my hand is not working, the computer hand.
Oh, okay,
Like-
you can raise your hand then. Okay, we can
I-
think about that for a minute. Ian.
Yeah.
Yes, Allison.
Yes, thank you. I'm
You have a
sorry.
very cantankerous computer.
Right. My computer is being very naughty.
Okay.
But no, this concerns me a great deal. I mean, we need to have a civil engineer look at this proposal. I mean, there's no way that we can, after all the damage of the flood and the whole bit, I agree with the person who said that we shouldn't be building anything down there. Unfortunately, the climate has changed, and I guess this scares me, I have to say.
Well, stuff is already down there. It's already built. So,
Well, how liable is the town?
well, that depends what the town wants to do, and the town in the person of the Three Parks Committee and their outreach seems to want to move the structures. And Allison, it will be helpful to put the playground and the restroom up on the plateau because there is
Yeah,
less water there. So,
That's true.
that's
I
kind of
agree
the
with
whole reason that we want to do this, is because it kind of makes sense
Yep.
to get the playground to some place where it's not going to be as destroyed.
that.
And that's
That I
why
think is right.
we restricted it to the pre-existing structures only.
Okay.
So, and I'm just thinking about Ian's point about whether we can, truly restrict any other paths except for accessibility paths. Because,
Can we remove the word "or use" from V? A reasonable degree of accessibility to a non-conforming structure may be provided. Because, the soccer field doesn't have a structure associated, it has a use associated with it.
Yeah, that's a good option.
yeah, we could do that. I mean, and we've fixed it so that, we had one difficulty in that Tyler wanted to call the playground a use, but we've removed that by identifying the things that are going to be moved as the playground structures. It's not the playground that is going to be moved, because you can move the structures and you can arrange them any way you want to form a playground. But so I think we could remove the word use.
Yeah.
And of course, a walking path or a paved path around the park would not be going to a use. It would not be going to a structure. I mean, it would not be going to a structure. So that would be helpful. Let's do that.
So,
All right.
Okay. Now, what about the fill question?
well, you need to do a Loma F if you want to bring fill into the floodplain. So
But it's not new fill. It's what is already in the floodway. The dirt is in the floodway. You're just moving it from here to there. I mean, it makes me queasy, but
Yeah.
So you can dig a hole. You can dig a hole from way out back behind the soccer fields and bring all that dirt up to the plateau. Do you want to?
well,
Yeah.
I don't
Seems
know
like-
that we should allow it. I mean, it's
So the nature of the floodway is that after a flood, you've got to move dirt around, because it's often new dirt that has been deposited there. So you can't ban moving all dirt in the floodway, I don't think,
Yeah.
not have any kind of use in it.
Yeah.
Well, I think you could if
seems reasonable.
you're associating with a use or a structure, though.
Yeah,
Well, I mean, every time there's a flood, the
Oh, yeah.
baseball diamond, the running path, which is some kind of red stuff, clay or something, is brought in. New material is brought in because that is all washed away.
Right.
So that's new, but it's maintenance, it's like maintaining the existing.
Mhm.
but I imagine there was a fair amount of just like gravel and stuff that was brought up from the river that had to be removed as well.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, I'm in favor of letting the DRB make that decision. I mean, we're not talking about massive amounts of fill. I mean, reality wise, and I know that's probably not the approach I should be taking as as administrator, but reality and common sense has got to dictate at some point, and that's where the DRB comes in. I know it's a stretch. I get it. Reality and common sense. That is.
I think we're capable of incorporating reality and common sense into our decisions here.
I hope so. I
You're an
agree.
optimist. Yes. Well, the DRB is already going to have to make some decisions about reasonable.
Yep, reasonable degree.
So if they want to think that flattening out the grade is what constitutes reasonable, I mean, I guess that's their prerogative. But it does say right now, reasonable in this context means accepting the current terrain as given, which was a way to talk about not moving dirt around. So, we could take that out, I suppose.
And also during the design phase, there are, and this also is associated with fences. You can have, breakaway fences. You can have breakaway access ramps, i.e. removable, not necessarily breakaway. And they still meet ADA requirements. They're expensive, but they're removable. And if you know a flood is coming, you remove them, and which we do with most of the materials that we can remove from the park. I mean, that's what Pete does. But that again gives the DRB the ability to require that as a condition of approval, that these fences are removable or these access ramps are removable. That's just an option. I'm not saying that's a panacea for everything, but it is an option. So maybe language, to the effect at some point, those type of structures should be encouraged as part of the site plan or something along those lines. It's a little subjective, but it gives you the ability and the allowance to do it.
So how are you suggesting that we write this?
I think that falls under a reasonable degree of accessibility.
Okay.
You gotta apply that. I mean, that's a great term right there. It's wholly subjective,
Right.
yet legal.
Yes. And it comes out of the ADA exemptions, so to speak, use both feasible and reasonable, and also to the degree practicable.
Yeah, that's a great one too.
And they also talk about cost. If it costs a lot more to do it than the whole thing is worth, then you don't necessarily have to do it. So, there's this language about making exceptions. And they also say in the ADA regulation that is just like hundreds of pages long, but they say, even if you can't make it accessible to every kind of disabled person, you can do the best you can and make it available to some disabled people. So, I don't know.
I mean, I guess if we wanted to really drill down into it, you could probably throw those into the incidental structure language, the temporary ramps and the like. I mean, I'm just looking at it from a practical point of view. As you're going into winter, you would typically remove all the stuff from the park, especially if you go, you'd want to do that. That would be pragmatic, because you get the spring thaw, the chances of flooding is higher, especially if we have a lot of snowpack. You would want to remove that, and you have the ability to move that accessible ramps. I think that's a no-brainer from a planning or site plan review aspect. So that's just another thing I'm throwing out there, and I'm thinking consciously right now.
Well, so maybe under this accessibility section, I'd like it to be in the accessibility section. We can say removable structures
Would be encouraged.
could be considered, or should be considered. Removable structures should be encouraged, or could be considered, or something like that. So and hopefully the DRB would be made aware of the different possibilities that exist for meeting it. I mean, the other problem with having a paved structure that has gone through a floodway is that it may be damaged, and so it's not going to be accessible after it's damaged for a while until it's fixed. So, probably it would be better if you had something you could take away, because then you could put it back and it wouldn't be damaged and you wouldn't have to fix it. But I don't know. I think these might be design questions more than.
Yeah, and it's also more expensive, but I think it's something that would last over and over and over. So I mean,
Right, versus the cost of repairing things
right,
many times.
right. Get what you pay for, or vote for.
Okay, so removable structures to meet the accessibility needs should be considered. I mean, anybody want to weigh in further on that?
It also makes it shall.
Shall be considered? Should be considered? Where's the shall? What are you suggesting?
Where instead of should, it be shall, so it makes it a requirement that you have to consider it. Whereas if you say should, it's like, whatever.
Okay, shall, yep, sure. Tyler's gonna love this. Okay. And so are we taking out means accepting the current terrain as given, which is an anti-fill statement? Or should we say that shall be considered also? Accepting the current terrain as given shall be considered, as will removable structures to meet the goals.
So additional on-ground improvements shall be the minimum needed to achieve accessibility, and reasonable in this context means accepting the current terrain as, well, I think you have the shall right there, is shall be the minimum.
Well, it may mean accepting the current terrain as given. We could put may in there. In this context, means the current terrain may need to be as given or something.
No. Let's say the board.
Anybody else want to talk about this?
Keep beating it.
All right. Ian, does that meet your needs or?
Yep.
Okay, Chris, is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so the only other thing that we could talk about with this flood hazard overlay district, and this is the Three Parks Committee. They're not here tonight, but they will have another shot at this, obviously, after we send it to the select board, and they can think about this language as well, if they wish. So, in the definitions section, we added a definition for recreation path. And the reason that we did that was because in section 2.4.4, it says that a recreation path is allowed in any district.
Mhm.
So that would include the flood hazard overlay district. So we have made a definition for the kind of recreational path that we think was intended to be allowed in any district and that we would wish to be allowed in the flood hazard overlay district, which is a non-paved path of 4 feet or less that is designed for pedestrian use, and the only change that has been made to it from the natural landscape is you remove the vegetation. So it's not paved, there's no structures on it, it's just a footpath. So in the flood hazard overlay district, a paved or gravel path is considered an on-ground improvement, and it falls under the definition of structures, which a new one of is not allowed. So this will help with Ian's problem with not allowing a paved path to go around. It's a new structure that is not permitted in the use table. So that's recreation path, and that will apply to the whole, it's in section 7 definitions, it will apply to the whole document, but we think it's needed there because it's not defined what a recreation path that's allowed in any district is. So this is what we're suggesting it be defined as, which then brings up the question that has been tormenting Tyler and the Andrews Forest Committee about trails. What is a trail? So we thought this might be a good time to make some definitions about trails, which are related to recreation paths. So I have added a suggestion, which was recent, so it's not in your notes, but a trail is going to be one of two things. It's either going to be a natural trail, which is like a recreation path or a footpath. In other words, only the vegetation has been removed. So there's that, a natural trail, and then there's also an on-ground improvement trail, which is, oh yeah, it's in my note. Is it in my notes? No, it's not in my notes.
Not in this one. Okay.
No, I don't know if I did send it to you, Keith, I think, but anyway, it was just today I was working on it. So you have a natural trail, which is you just remove the vegetation and it's dirt. You don't change it, you don't pave it, you don't put bridges on it, you do nothing with it, and that's what is allowed in any district. An on-ground improvement trail is the other kinds of trails where it's wider than 4 feet maybe, or it's paved, or it's gravel, or there are bridges, or are boardwalks, like it's across a wetland, it's boardwalk. So the language that I have is an on-ground improvement trail where the alterations to the landscape may involve addition or removal of fill, addition of gravel or pavement, addition of accessory structures such as but not limited to boardwalks and bridges, or widening of the traveled area beyond 4 feet. Trails that are on-ground improvements are prohibited on slopes greater than 35 feet
I can pull this up.
and require a professional erosion and sedimentation plan if on slopes between 20 and 35 feet. Trails that are on-ground improvements shall require a permit.
I found it. Yes, I thought I did.
So, we can think about whether we would like to try to help Tyler out of his dilemma about trails by putting some definitions of trails in here, which I was hoping to do with the VRNs, but we didn't really get to it. Here we go. Yep, there's the suggested definition for the 2 types of trails that there are. So for instance, so now when the Andrews Community Forest people come and say, we want to put this gravel trail with bridges and boardwalks, that is going to require a permit. If they're just going to clear the vegetation from a narrow walking area in the dirt, that is not requiring a permit. Is that correct, Keith? 2.4.4, they don't require a permit. They're allowed.
Yeah, it's just saying that the recreational, what paths is it, are allowed in all zones?
Yeah, recreational paths shall be allowed in any district. It just says they shall be allowed. It doesn't say whether or not you have to get a permit for it, but I mean, it seems like that would be something you wouldn't have to get a permit for.
Specifically if it's on private property, correct?
Yeah. It also says that if it's on a lot that doesn't meet the lot requirements, you can do it anyway.
Be a small trail.
Question?
Yeah. Yes.
You're using the, when you say slopes greater than 25 or 35 feet, I always, is that, are you talking about like the degree of the slope there?
Yeah.
It's percentage.
Oh, it's, okay.
It's
It's a rise over run.
yeah.
Yeah, all right.
And there are rules, Ian, about driveways and stuff that have to
Yeah.
do with the degree of slope.
Yep. Yeah,
that
I've had to
you've got.
deal with it. Yep.
Yeah. So,
So
over
that's pretty,
35
that's
feet.
pretty steep. That's pretty steep.
Yes, it's pretty steep.
Yeah,
But-
so 35% slopes, you're prohibited to do any development on them. It's prohibited.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then this 20 to 35, you have to do the professional erosion and sedimentation plan, so you don't get a lot of runoff.
Yeah.
But it can be permitted with that. That's the thing.
Right.
So necessarily need to go to the DRB for that.
So let's see, if we say it's permitted, do we say it's a conditional use, or are we just going to assume that you go to the DRB?
Well, if it's part of a use, it's definitely going to go to the DRB. You know,
Right. So in the Andrews Community Forest, it would be part of a use, presumably. It's a
Yeah.
use,
and it would be considered a structure, although we had that conversation today
right?
about that. So I don't know, where did we leave that?
So anyway, I don't know if people want to think about that, if they want to leave it out of this so that we can move this along to the select board, if they want to take it on as written. I don't know. What's your will?
That language seems good to me.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense that a path is just, you just take away the vegetation, and that's okay, because if you don't want it there, you can just let the vegetation grow back. A path that is gravel,
Yeah.
or has structures is more of a permanent thing.
Mhm.
And would require a permit.
And would require a permit. But Keith, I'm unsure how we know whether it's a,
Because it's a what we went through it. It's land development.
well, I put as a final sentence in the version that, I don't know if it's the version that you have, trails that are on-ground improvements shall require a permit. But do we know if it's a Tyler permit or a DRB a permit?
It would be a DRB permit if it was associated with a use that is required to have CUR. In Tyler's case, if it's on private property and it's not publicly accessed or anything along those lines, if somebody wants to do a trail and put a structured trail in, it would require a permit from Tyler or the zoning administrator. That's
If
how I
it's
would
on
interpret that.
private, if it's on public land, like in the Andrews Forest, if it's on public land, then it requires a DRB permit. Is that,
Well, it requires DRB conditional use review because of that use, because that use requires CUR.
what is the use?
The use would be outdoor recreational facility or whichever one that they fall under.
So, okay.
So we discussed about putting that in all the, well, we discussed putting the on-ground improvements in all the districts.
Right. As a permitted or
As a
additional?
permitted use from the zoning administrator.
Okay. So this one would, trails that are on-ground improvements would require a permit from the zoning administrator.
Correct. And trails that would be associated with a outdoor recreational use would require conditional use review from the DRB if it's listed underneath the CUR table.
So we would have to put that into the use, the conditional use table?
It already is.
Aren't all trails associated with a recreational use?
No, you wouldn't put that in. You just put recreational. Recreational use is an outdoor recreational facility is required to have conditional use review. If part of that recreational facility includes trails, it would be part of that overall review.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what triggers it.
So we would be considering the Andrews Community Forest an outdoor recreational facility?
Yep. Yep. And that's the gatekeeping that gets you to the DRB. Or it gets you to do a permit through the zoning administrator if it's private. I see the wheels turning.
Well, I'm just not clear that the private public distinction is clear. I mean, because if it's with a private on private property, it's still associated with a use.
Right, but it's not a public use.
Right. So is that public-private thing stated somewhere?
Yeah, and well, it's not stated somewhere. It's by default. So if you have a private property and you want to do a structured trail on your property for your own use, that
Yeah.
requires a simple permit from the zoning administrator.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a facility that has structured trails on it, that would require conditional use review.
Mhm.
Because it's a public, I mean, it could be private, but if the use is a facility, then it's required to go through conditional use review, regardless of who owns the land. It's the use you got to look at.
Okay. Well, I mean, if that seems clear to you, then that's good.
I mean, yeah, I mean, that's how I would apply it.
Right.
And I've had these conversations with Tyler. We're not 100% on board with each other on this, but I'm not gonna help promulgate based on somebody's interpretation at this point. I mean, we'll have to adjust if it's that problematic.
Okay.
Just keep it
Ian,
the way it is.
You had,
Has anybody on the ACF committee expressed concern or interest in what we're talking about?
Yes.
the people
And
on
do
the
they feel
ACF,
like this would be too like onerous on them?
Yeah, because they have not been required to do that anywhere else. That's their argument.
the people on the ACF committee who wish to put the more trails do not want to have to get a permit. That's my understanding of their problem, right, Keith? They
Correct.
don't want to get it, they don't want to have to go and get a permit.
For
There are some
new
other
trails.
wrinkles in the way their park was set up, but basically they don't want to have to get a permit. But it seems like if you're putting down gravel and making structures, you probably should get a permit on public property.
Yep, especially
So-
as steep public property.
Especially if it's
That
steep.
abuts Route 2.
And it's associated with the use.
Yeah,
That's the key. The use being an outdoor recreational establishment.
So the answer is some of the people on the ACF don't like it, but there are some conflicts on the ACF committee.
Really?
I haven't heard anything about that.
Yeah, me either.
Yeah, no, there's some major conflicts. So you were kidding, of course. Yeah, so does it bother you that they're going to not like this?
Me?
Yeah,
No, it doesn't bother me. I just like to kind of take that into consideration. And I'd probably want to hear a little bit more about what their concerns are,
Mhm.
even though I can probably surmise what they are, but
yeah. The conflict is sort of many-dimensional conflict.
so this is gonna have to be, there'll be a public hearing about this, I presume.
Yeah, we will have our public hearing about it,
Right. Yeah.
and then the select board will have a public hearing about it.
So
So,
they would have an opportunity to express their concern at that point if they're so
yes,
inclined.
we would have to make them aware that this was being discussed.
Yep.
Else they would feel that they hadn't been told that it was going to be discussed. So I think we would have to send, an email to the committee, the Andrews Forest Committee, telling them that we were actually going to discuss this. I think that would be wise.
Yep.
So,
Okay.
all right, so that is all I have on the flood hazard overlay district amendments. Members of the committee have said that this meets their needs, the changes that we made that will allow a band shell to become a pavilion if necessary, that will allow the restrooms to be moved up onto the plateau, that will allow the playground to be moved up onto the plateau. But it doesn't open the door to any new structures to be put in the floodway, which is undesirable. So, yeah, I mean, if people are comfortable with it, then we can approve it for a public hearing, for our public hearing.
Mhm.
If you want more time with it, then we have one meeting in December that we could talk further about it. But I take it as a good sign that the Three Parks Committee didn't come tonight, actually, and that they were feeling that it was allowing them to do what they needed to do at our last meeting.
So what's the next step? Do we have to make a motion to have a public hearing?
Yes, if people are comfortable with it. I mean, Chris, are you okay with it? You didn't hear everything from the last meeting, but
I'm comfortable with it. Yeah.
okay. How about you, Allison?
I'm comfortable with it.
Okay.
Can,
All right.
can you hear me? Because my,
Yes,
Yep.
okay, all right, good.
we can hear you fine. Yes.
Yeah, I'm getting these funky looking things on my screen here, but I'm
Oh.
still here.
Your computer is a rogue. All right, Ian, so do you want to make a motion?
Sure. I'll make a motion that we forward the changed language in the flood hazard overlay to the,
Yeah, we need to
Or-
go through the planning commission. So we're gonna want to pick a date at this point. I'm sorry, Ian, to cut you
that's
off.
okay, yeah, I'm
Yeah.
not good at this.
So we had discussed that a little bit today, Virginia, and the outside chance that this would happen, or inside chance. We were thinking of a January date. Or what do you think, Virginia?
Well, we could have the January 15th. We will have to talk in our other business about whether we're going to have more than one meeting in January and also more than one meeting in December. So the January 15th is a date that could be picked to have a public hearing on this.
And that's our regular scheduled meeting. That's our
That's
second.
our regularly scheduled meeting.
Mhm.
So, you could make a motion to, that the planning commission approves the amended language for the flood hazard overlay district and section 7 definitions, and also 4.7 and 4.8 sections, which transfer the authority to the flood hazard overlay district to regulate nonconformities in that district. And we have approved it for public hearing by the planning commission on January 15th.
Ian, I guess you could just say.
I'll
so
make a
moved.
motion to the effect of exactly what Virginia just said,
That should work. Yep,
on January 15th, 2025.
2025, yep.
Gosh.
Does that meet your needs, Keith?
That's fine. Yeah, January 15th is fine. We can
Thanks,
set that up.
Virginia.
Okay, so we have this motion that's been made, so we would need a second for it.
Second,
Seconded by Chris. Okay, so any further discussion? Not seeing any hands or hearing any discussion. We will take a vote on this motion. So all in favor of approving this motion should raise your hand or say aye.
aye.
Aye. Okay, so it passes with a vote of 4-0. And we will schedule a public hearing on the 15th of January. Okay, great. So that's good. I think, everybody will be happy with that.
Not everybody.
Most people will be happy with that. It was the compromise. We're trying to walk the line, not
Yeah.
making the flooding worse. Allison, trying not to add anything to make the flooding worse, but also letting
Yeah.
us do
I
some
get
things
that.
that are reasonable, which is to move the things onto the hill.
No, I think that's very reasonable, but I just think that it's just a big challenge.
Yep. Climate
Yeah.
change. It's not going to get any less of a challenge.
Yeah.
So, all right. So let's move on to our next item. Partial work on the density bonus program and the next steps. So we haven't talked about this for a while, and so
Yeah.
some conversations and so on have happened in this intervening few weeks that I just want to state. I didn't get a chance to write it up as a memo, but so there's a number of points that we need to think about.
Did you want me to pull up what you sent or?
Sure, that's fine. You can pull it up if you want. I'll start while he's doing that. So the first thing is that there has been a concern about the spot zoning question. Are we engaging in spot zoning by writing an ordinance that so far we have only applied, or we're only planning to, in the immediate future, apply to the Jolena Court District? It is for a whole district, but in this whole district, there's only one property that would even qualify to do this kind of thing. So it's a concern that we need to think about. We don't want to do spot zoning. It opens us up to legal issues. We could solve it by, at the same time as we put it into the Jolena Court District, put it into the, let's say, Village RC District or something like that. So then that takes away that concern. So we want to think about that. The second item is that in conversations that we've had with Taylor Newton at the Regional Planning, CCRPC, and also Jacob Hemrick of the Agency of Commerce and Community Development, who was instrumental in writing a lot of the Act 47 and 181 language. The focus on affordable housing has diminished as opposed to just on more housing. It's an impediment, it's a barrier to housing, requiring it to be affordable. So they've kind of switched their emphasis to just let's make more housing.
Who's
So I'm
this?
just putting this out there. Taylor Newton, who's at the Regional Planning Commission.
All right, that's his perspective. But by the way, Virginia, what are we looking at on the screen here? Was because this wasn't in the materials that was available on the website, right?
I finished it today. These were thoughts that I had been meaning to put up as a meeting memo. So it's not really a meeting memo. It's just some thoughts that I'm putting out there.
Okay.
I labeled it a meeting memo because it fit into my program here. But anyway.
But it hasn't, yeah, we haven't had a chance to look at it, is what
No,
you're
you
saying.
haven't had a chance to look at it. And I'm sorry about that, but I didn't get to it. So for instance, Taylor Newton said, why don't you not have a density bonus program and just concentrate on doing the things that we've suggested in enabling better places, like we've already been doing, like having more ADUs, having more density in the village, smaller lot sizes. So it's just a slight shift in the way people seem to be thinking about this. The people that we've talked to, just putting it out there, it's their opinions, Chris, it is what it is. People just want more housing.
Right, but with the effect of that, if I'm understanding correctly, to not offer buttermilk options for increasing the density on their site.
This is a possibility.
Okay.
This is what he was suggesting when we reached out to him to talk about this density bonus program, is that you'd be better off to just focus on these other things. And we'll talk about that a little bit more because there's some other stuff later on that are other conversations. Anyway. All right. So number 3, Keith and I talked to Josh and Pete about the public parking.
Call from Well Badly Mode.
Allison's
Call
computer is
from Well Badly Mode.
going rogue.
Uh, Allison, can you mute your computer, please?
There we go. All right. So the public parking option, it's not popular with Pete. It's not popular with Josh. They don't want to be tied to this, especially in perpetuity, to a relationship with this land that is now public parking. And apparently there are some parcels down on Lower Bridge Street and on Esplanade that are going in for the FEMA buyout that could possibly be additional parking. That was just mentioned in a conversation. So, and do we really need parking? There's these schools of thought. One is that it's only a perception that we need parking, that you drive through in the middle of the day, there's plenty of parking spaces. There's only a few times that you actually can't find a place. You may have to walk a little further, but it's something that, would be very unique to be offered as a density bonus.
Yeah, well,
Do
but
that.
Mark is the champion of that idea, and he's not here tonight, so I don't know how much makes
Yeah.
sense to spend time on it.
So, an option is to not offer that as a bonus. The other thing is, if we offer it to other districts, then it may not even make sense that you could pick parking in a place where parking is not necessary. And in the language that I've been working on, you have to that's only available in a place where parking is a problem, because you don't want somewhere out in the AR where your density bonus you're now offering, they pick parking and they just make a parking lot somewhere and get the affordable units. So anyway, just something to think about. And the other thing that I meant to mention under number 2, under these discussions with Taylor Newton and Jacob Hemrick, is that the state and the regions really want to get away from the idea of density anyway. They want to just eliminate density, which is a problem if you're putting into place a density bonus program, because you don't have any density to be over, if you know what I mean. Just a trend that's happening, and we may see more from the legislature because they're intervening in local zoning more than they ever have before. They may at some point say, you just in water and sewer districts, you can't have a density requirement. So that's something that may be coming down the line. All right. So think about the parking. What about the parking? Do we really want that? Number 4 is, administratively, it's cumbersome to bind the town to anything in perpetuity. And the 2 things we've said in perpetuity are the affordable housing units and the parking spaces, the public parking spaces in perpetuity. That's what has been suggested. So that was what I've put into the draft. But this is a long-term relationship with the town. We will go through many town administrators. We will go through many town planners. This has to be kept track of. Is it burdensome to subject the town to in perpetuity requirements? If you notice in the affordable housing development language that was passed in Act 47, it's only for 15 years. It can be as little as for 15 years, not in perpetuity. So, and we don't really know whether that was because it's much harder to get developers to go along with something in perpetuity, or whether it's harder to get small towns who have a rotating cast of characters to bind themselves to something in perpetuity. So that would be something to think about. Number 5 is that we understand, I think, that Buttermilk has asserted they are not interested in either affordable housing or giving up any of their parking, which is valuable. Parking is land that has value. They have said they do not want to give up any parking, and they do not want to be involved in affordable housing. So the possibility is there that they will not take any of these density bonuses, in which case we will have removed the commercial requirement and they will have their 31 units only. So they will make them bigger if they can finance it with that number of units. They will make them bigger and they will be more expensive. So we move kind of even further away from the thought that small apartments are more affordable. The other thing that has happened is that Buttermilk has approached Tyler about building 1 commercial where it's empty, completely empty now. There are no tenants. They claim some kind of business plan, but anyway, they can't get anyone to rent it. So there is that unused commercial space that is draining resources from them. Do we want to think about some or all of that also becoming residential? For instance, the front that's actually right on Bridge Street, a quarter of that building, maybe we should retain as commercial, and we could make the rest residential. I'm not saying I'm for that necessarily, but I think we ought to consider it as an opportunity to increase housing because we have this housing crisis. Maybe we should not make the rest of that commercial space stay commercial. Places all over the place like Burlington are making regulations that allow for commercial space to be residential. Maybe we should think about doing it, just something to think about. And one thing that we could do, especially if we're going to take away the commercial from 3/4 of building 1, then they will have a lot of space to fill. Maybe we should just increase their base density. We should give them more units to put in there and not make them have, if they don't take any of the bonus density units, then they will have 31 units that they can make huge in building 1 and building 2. Just something to think about.
Virginia, I have to interrupt here because
Yeah.
I'm having a real problem with the process.
Okay.
I think that this is really not, well, two things. First of all,
Yes.
after a lot of really hard work and a lot of pressure, mostly coming from you about the amount of time it was taking, we had arrived at an agreement that seemed to be generally, supported by the entire
Yes.
committee. Now, what it seems like you want to do is reopen the entire, most of the major controversial points of this again and re-argue them. And that will, of course, make this take longer. I thought your main point has been for some time that there was a sense of urgency here, that Buttermilk needed us to act, and that they were constantly complaining about our not acting. This is the way to further delay this process, okay, is to reopen all of these points again.
Well,
It's not going to be perfect because no regulation ever is, okay? But we did the work in the committee of coming up with an agreement, and it feels like you just personally weren't happy with that and decided that you weren't going to accept it. Why can't we just declare victory and go home on this one?
okay. Well, that's what you've got in front of you is the draft that has all the language in it.
Okay. The other
It's
thing I
not
have to
quite
say, that
done.
I do have to say also, though, that I really object to what feels like a tactic of not circulating what you knew was going to be controversial material ahead of time, but just reading it verbatim out loud to us in the context of a meeting. That's just not appropriate. And nobody has a chance to digest this ahead of time. Nobody has a chance to come up with thinking about how they feel about it.
Well, that's
Mark has
fine.
no idea that we're talking about this at this meeting.
You can
Okay,
talk,
and he's
you
gonna
can take this
care
home and
a
read it.
lot about it.
You can take it home and read it, and we can talk about the draft.
We shouldn't be talking about this at all at this meeting. Okay, we should take it home. We should think about it and come back and put it on the agenda for next time.
That's fine. We can do that. Just some points to think about.
I have a question.
Yep, go ahead.
So these guys, Mr. Newton and Mr. Hemrick, who is their constituency?
Okay, Taylor Newton is a planner what is his title, Keith? I don't know. He's a director of planning, I think, or something at
Yeah.
CCRPC, our regional plan.
Mhm.
So we are his constituency,
Okay.
and he was someone that we asked to help us improve this
Mhm.
because that's what our regional planning commission is supposed to be for.
Are these guys appointed?
Assist us. What?
Are they appointed, these positions, or?
No, they're hired. I mean, it's a hired position.
It's a staff.
It's professional staff, yeah.
Yeah, they're professional planners, and they're assigned to help the municipalities and to create the regional plan. And, we're going to be more and more involved with them as we work on our town plan because they have a
Yep.
whole new structure that they have to, based on new statutes, that they have to put all their municipalities slotted into. So
Mhm.
Yeah.
And do you know, like, what do we know about their backgrounds? Like, do they live in cities? Do they have experiences living in a small town or doing planning for small towns?
Well, Taylor does, definitely. I mean, he
Yeah.
was the manager. He's now a director. He's been with CCRCP for many years, and he cut his teeth up in St. Albans in the Northern Regional Planning Commission.
Mhm.
And he's basically number 2 at CCRCP, at least in the planning, but he's number 1 in the planning department. He's got a wealth of experience. Jacob, I don't know too much about Jacob. I know he's an AICP, which has quite a bit of cachet to it, which is a American Institute of Certified Planners credential. Those don't grow on trees. So we do lean on Jacob quite a bit also. So I mean, as far as their credentials, I think that they are credentialed, to be honest with you.
Okay.
And
And as far as,
the
oh,
only
sorry.
reason that we reached out to these people is because this is new territory for us.
Yeah.
You know, like I'm writing this ordinance that, if it's accepted by people, will have ramifications.
Right.
I like to have people to help who know something about it. That's why we look for advice from other people.
Yeah. I'm not, I don't question the intent of going to these folks, but they're making influential decisions about our town. And I think I'd just like to know what their philosophy in general is about things. Because when I
think
hear stuff like, we're not going to use density anymore. I mean, well, what are you going to use to plan? You know, I mean, how do you plan, or what tools do you use if you don't have density to kind of keep the kind of things that we're concerned about from happening in the village residential districts from happening?
Yeah, a quick answer to that would be the carrying capacity of the land itself would be the only governor with that in, you know. So I mean, can you meet the setbacks? Can you meet the overall lot coverage, so on as a height and so on and so forth.
Mhm.
For sure. And I'm speaking for myself when I say this as a planner. These are opinions. They're not gospel. You
Yeah.
know, these are opinions that we sought.
Okay.
And I think they're well-informed and valuable opinions. Again, my concern is not with the source. It's with the process and the timing here. We've been doing this for years, okay? We've been working on this issue with Jelena Park. We've gotten all kinds of input from lawyers and everybody up and down the line, you know, the Vermont Housing Finance Agency. We had an agreement that seemed like it was going to work, and introducing this point feels designed to blow it up. Okay?
No, the point, Chris, is to make a document that works. And it's not,
Decide what works. We're the planning commission. We give it to the select board. They are the ones who may have the final say. But we can get good advice from anybody we want, but we decide what works for this town.
yeah, well, I mean, it has to be it has to work legally, for
Of
one
course.
thing. And it has to be something that developers are going to bite on, else why bother? It has to be, you know,
Except like you said,
there are many.
we don't need the developer to take advantage of this. You said that yourself. That's actually in this document that you prepared here, I believe. Okay,
Yeah.
this is an option.
Yeah. So let's look at the document, and you can see that there are just many features of it that require some thinking about or knowing about how such a system is going to work. I don't know if you knew, but Revy worked directly for the select board for almost a year on a density bonus program. It never really made it to us for some reason. The pandemic intervened, and they stopped. But the select board had several meetings about a density bonus program. It was very complex. It was very complicated. It had a lot of features. So, you know, clearly there are a lot of little issues that you have to resolve if you want it to be an actual functioning document. So we can look at the document right now. That's fine. You can take the memo home and just think about these things that have come up. And do you want to look at the document? Do you want to start in looking at the document?
Well, are you talking about the one that you have up right now? Like I said, I want us to.
No,
to-
the program.
The one that
It's
we
in
agreed
the
on.
meeting materials.
Oh, yeah, that draft, that's the one that was circulated, yeah.
Yeah. So do you want to look at that?
The last 10 minutes, yeah.
In the last 15 minutes. Yep, 10 minutes.
Well,
Yep. Okay, so I'm assuming that people have read this, we hope, and that they have looked at the different features. As we had agreed, we have the 3 types of bonuses. The senior, we have stopped referring to them as senior and just call them accessible and adaptable because of concerns with age-related discrimination that we already talked about in terms of the VRNs with the elder care facilities. There are problems with restricting based on age. So when we come down, we've made the language accessible and adaptable. And we've got what we agreed, 2 units shall allow for 1 additional market rate unit. And the difference between adaptable and accessible is talked about in there. Basically, it's accessible except where it's only has to be adaptable. Then we have the second one is the true income sensitive affordable housing.
actually, before you go on, I thought that the first one was good. But I did have one question about 16-15-5-4C.
16-15-5.
4C.
Features.
That-
6.15.4B, yes.
C, no or few steps. And I was, I just had a question about that. If the idea is to make it wheelchair accessible. No, you had it right before. Down, scroll down. Yeah, there. Okay, and then C. So required features of the dwelling unit.
Right.
So no or few steps. To be wheelchair accessible, it really can't have any steps, can it? Well, I guess why are we saying few?
Yeah, you could take out the few and just put no steps. Yep, that's fine. I mean, I guess I was thinking of a ramp or something over if there were a small number of steps, but we could have no steps.
Yeah, I could say no steps, but ramps are permissible. I don't know. I mean, the idea being just that a
Right.
person should be able to navigate it.
Yep. Yeah, anything else on there that doesn't seem
was the
to
only thing.
work? Okay, yeah, so section 6.15.4 just talks about the 3 kinds of units that are available. And then in 16.15.5, we talk about the different requirements for the different types. So income sensitive was B, public parking is C. I don't know if anyone has any comments about those. And then we go to the requirements for each one of these. So with the accessible adaptable units, you have the features of the site and the features of the building and the features of the unit to consider. They all have to be in place. The requirements for the income sensitive affordable units is 16.15.6. Did you have any comments about that, Chris?
I do not. No, I think this is in line with what we were talking about before. I need to do a little bit of background research that I haven't had time to do yet, but I'll do before the next meeting. But I thought on the face of it looked good.
Yeah, so basically the affordable housing part is all, part of the definition of affordable housing. And it's written for either owner occupied housing, in other words, for sale or for rent. Could have either one of those as long as it meets the chart. There will be, it's for in perpetuity, which is a question that I think we should think about. Do we want this to be in perpetuity or not? Some other requirements like rental units, there's a maximum rent increase of 3% per year. These things have to be certified. All the agreements have to be certified. And that actually comes later in the administrative part of it where the certifications are required. And I don't know exactly whether certified is the right word, but we can talk about that. And also it mentions that affordable housing development as required in statute is 20% or more. So under the bonus program, you can't have 20% or more because then it would fall into the other program where you automatically get 40% more density and one extra floor. So this is for projects that have less than 20% of the project's units being affordable. Any other questions about that?
Nope.
I want to make sure that there's nothing I've missed. That's why I'm going and asking people about this. There's no requirements that have been missed. All right, so 615.7 is the requirements for the public parking density units. They're going to be managed by the applicant, but they're dedicated, and I don't know if that's the right word either, to the town of Richmond in perpetuity, which we should think about. There will have to be some kind of formal agreement, obviously, a contract, or think about that a little bit. The management of the spaces is the responsibility of the applicant. In this case, it would be Buttermilk. There's a list of things that are maintenance. We have to have an agreement signed by the highway department and the applicant. And we put in the fact that if they want to lease them out or charge rent, they can do that, as long as they're called public parking spaces. They have to be clearly identified, and the applicant has to design some kind of system for distinguishing between their own people's parking and the public parking. Because if they put in these public parking spaces and they're always filled by their own residents, that's not good either. So that's a complicated piece to it, is what that system is going to look like and how it's going to be enforced and who's going to enforce it. A little more work needs to be done on that. That's why this is called partial, because there are places that don't, to me, seem watertight. All right, and then we go to the next part, which talks about what's required to apply for these, what is required for monitoring, what is required for verification. Oh, it's not on there yet?
To be determined.
Oh, all right. So I thought that I had sent the next part to you. Is it draft number 9 that you've got up there?
Well, this is what, yep, draft number 9. This is
11/17/24, 11/17/24.
11/10/24. This is what Duncan put up.
Oh, it's 11/17/24. There's one that's 11/17/24.
Oh, that's not what was on the website. What Keith that's up is what was on the website.
Okay, and the part of the problem was Keith was out sick for 10 days, so Duncan did the posting. So I don't think he had the right document up there.
So about
Anyway.
the public parking, two things. Maybe rather than, I think you're right, is the dedicated is probably not the right word. Can we just say something like shall be made available to the town of Richmond? I mean, something that, because we're not talking about transferring ownership, right?
No, but we're talking about having some kind of an agreement that these are public parking spaces. I'm not sure that made available is going to cut it.
Maybe not, but dedicated, I'm not sure covers that meaning also. And then the other question I had was, what was the, I was going to ask about this. Oh, it's gone out of my head. Oh, I know what it was. If Josh and Pete have concerns about the administration of this, they should submit those concerns to the Planning Commission in writing. That would just be helpful for everybody, I think.
Do you want them to do that before we have a public hearing on it, or do you want to wing it?
I think it'd be helpful, yeah, because if the commission has a chance to consider those concerns, I mean, I don't know that we should necessarily put something that doesn't address those in front of the public.
Yeah, well, I agree, and maybe we can get them to write their concerns down and submit them to us.
Doesn't have to be fancy, you know, just a paragraph telling us what their concern is.
Yep. All right, well, there's more of this document, but we're out of time anyway, so we'll send it with the next version. And meanwhile, if people would read it and get comments together, that would be handy. Because it's sort of complicated to write in a way that's really going to capture what we need it to capture. So, all right. More on that at our December meeting. So we will move on to our next agenda item, which is a couple of things with the updates. One is to finalize our schedule. Chris, do you want to meet on the 18th? I will not be available either way. Or do you want to skip that meeting, which is fine with me?
Let's see, you're talking about December 18th. My guess is we're going to have a hard time with a quorum that day. I think we should probably just skip.
Yep, me too. So we'll have one meeting in December. It will be on December the 4th. And we can spend the whole time on Jolena Court if we hopefully will have some more material then. January 1st is New Year's Day. So I think we should only have one meeting in January also, which will be the 15th of January. But
Of which we have a public hearing for the FHOD.
which we have a public hearing for the flood hazard overlay district. And sometime regional planning has got to come and talk to us about the NDA and how our regulations are deficient in terms of thinking about the NDA. If they want to, it's going to have to be, I don't know when, Keith, February probably.
Looking back at the minutes, it was supposed to be in December. That's not going to happen. They're crushed right now. So
Yeah.
I'll reach out to them tomorrow. We'll figure it out.
So they're also supposed to, 18 months before the adoption of the new plan or the readoption of the old plan, they are supposed to review our plan and tell us what the deficiencies are in the plan. I don't expect that anytime soon either. So we're just going to have to carry on with our town plan work on our own. And hopefully the committees who are in charge of the action items will come back with saying what they've done, and they will start thinking about what they want to recommend for the new plan. We're going to have to at some point make a plan about the plan, like are we going to have public hearings? You know, when are we going to do that? How are we going to keep track of the comments that are being made by the different committees about different sections of the plan? We've, you know, Keith and I have started to work on that. We were going to wait until after the Regional Planning Commission came back with its assessment of how our plan was deficient, but that's not going to be anytime soon because they have been assigned a million tasks. So anyway, December 4th, January 15th. Everybody good with that for those 2 months?
Yep.
Sounds good.
And
Is
maybe
it Regional Planning Commission just for like Chittenden County, or is it like a statewide?
so there's a Regional Planning Commission for all the different areas of Vermont.
Mhm.
So Chittenden County, CCRPC, is our Regional Planning Commission. It is for Chittenden County. But like Central Vermont Regional Planning Commission, CVRCP, is for a bunch of different counties. And then there's one in the Northeast Kingdom. I forget how many there are, Keith. Do you know how many regional, are there 7 regional planning commissions or something?
I
I
believe
think
it
there are
is
7, and they all have the same basic function for a different area of the state.
And our
It's the
town
only-
has a liaison to the CCRCP, who I'm not sure who that is, right? Who is that?
I think maybe it's
Bard.
Bard.
Is it Bard?
Yep.
It's Bard, yeah. It has to be a select board member now. It used not to have to be a select board member, but
He's the chair of it right now too. So
Oh, okay.
he's a muckety muck.
yeah. So and our regional planning commission, Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission, is the only one of the commissions that has a statutory responsibility to do metropolitan transportation planning. So they spend the federal money that comes in for highways and stuff. That's different from the other planning commissions in Vermont, the other regional planning commissions. It's the nearest thing we have to any kind of county government. We don't have county government here, but we have these regional planning commissions, and that's why they're taxed with doing all this amazing amount of work right now, a lot of it from Act 181.
Yeah.
So anyway, but they're helpful. They make our maps and stuff. And so, what else? Biofinder training in January. Somebody else besides me, hopefully from the Planning Commission, will go to that training about using this mapping tool, which we're going to need when we talk about our forested land, which we are required to protect by a variety of statutes now. We're also required to preserve 30% of our land conserved by 2030. We're going to have to figure out how we're going to do that. We're going to need these maps. So the Biofinder tool is going to help us with that. So hopefully I will go, somebody else hopefully will go.
Do they serve free coffee?
It's on Zoom, so all the coffee you want,
Yes.
you make it, you drink it. That's good. Yeah. So I can send out the invitation to that again. It's January 9th at 7 p.m. It's like an hour or something. It's not a big commitment or anything, but it's going to be really handy to be able to use that tool.
Pretty slick.
What else? And that's all I had. The only other thing was the report on the brief conversation with Jenna that I had that she's going to work on the legislative connection to Act 181. Anybody have anything else they want to talk about?
I'd like to thank you guys for all the work you've been doing.
Thank you, Ian. It
Welcome.
turns out to be a lot of work, actually.
Yes, sure.
So anyway, all right.
Move that we adjourn.
Sounds good. Just second to that.
Yep. Second.
Okay. If no one is opposed to adjourning, we will stand adjourned. Anybody is opposed? Nobody's opposed. All right. Thank you all for coming. Allison, thanks for struggling through it.
Good night.
Thanks to your
Right.
son for coming down to help you.
See ya.
You're muted right now, so we can't hear you. But anyway,
Have a good Thanksgiving.
see you next time. Yeah, you as well.
Happy
Bye.
Thanksgiving.
Yes, you too, Aaron. Allison, bye.